In the deepest quadrant of the equatorial death zone, where the forests of old Earth had mutated into towering cathedrals of bark and venom, where humidity clung to the lungs like wet hands and lightning stitched the sky in ragged blue scars, Dr. Aria Velasquez pressed through the underbrush with the alien infant strapped to her chest, each heartbeat echoing fear and determination as she searched for a safe path toward the abandoned Terran research outpost, rumored to be within 30 kilometers, though the terrain felt more like 30 years of hell, because the Anacondrax, the ancient bioengineered serpents created by the precursor empire, had begun stirring again, their roars circulating through the jungle like rolling thunder, their hunger awakened by the faint pulse of Kaerathun energy radiating from the tiny alien child she carried, a species thought extinct but now wrapped around her like a sleeping shadow, its midnight blue skin warm against her own, its silver eyes occasionally flickering with distress when distant tremors shook the soil. She remembered the night she found it, alone in a collapsed alien hatchery pod, surrounded by bones of its kin, crying with the raw, primal grief of a species betrayed by its creators, abandoned before it ever had a chance to grow, and she had lifted it, despite every Terran military directive warning that the Kaerathun were genetically unstable, dangerous, capable of releasing destructive waves even as infants. But when it reached out and hooked its tiny glowing fingers into her coat, refusing to let go, Arya knew she could not leave it, no matter the danger. And now that danger was upon them in ways she could barely comprehend. The ground shook with a predator's weight, branches snapped overhead, and before she could react, the largest Anacondrax she had ever seen, a serpent longer than a transport shuttle and thicker than an armored tank, dropped from the canopy, its bioluminescent scales shimmering like molten emeralds, its toxin-laced breath fogging the air with acidic vapor as it coiled to strike. But in that impossible moment, the tiny alien child woke, its silver eyes blazing with ancestral fear and raw instinct, and with a desperate, warbling cry it leapt from her arms, planting itself between her and the descending beast, its small frame trembling as an impossible surge of energy spiraled outward, distorting the very air and cracking the ground beneath them, forming a shimmering dome around Arya with the child at the center, each pulse of its voice sending rolls of invisible force outward like sonic tsunamis. The giant serpent slammed into the barrier, scales peeling away under the pressure, its roars drowning out the storm above as it crashed through trees, but the infant held firm, its tiny fingers splayed wide, channeling more power than it should ever have been able to summon, until finally, with a blinding eruption of silver-blue light, the Anacondrax was hurled across the valley, smashing into a cliffside that crumbled into dust. The infant collapsed immediately afterward, unconscious, tiny chest rising in shallow breaths, and Arya scrambled forward, scooping it up with shaking hands, whispering frantic comfort even as tears stung her eyes, for she realized she had just witnessed a Kaerathun's defensive instinct, something so powerful it had once been classified as a weapon of extinction by the ancients. And yet the child had not used it to destroy, only to protect her. Moments later, a Terran Frontier Division dropship crashed through the canopy, soldiers rappelled down, their helmets glowing, weapons drawn, forming a perimeter as they surveyed the cratered landscape. And though they aimed rifles at the child, Arya stood tall, shielding the infant with her own body, shouting that it saved her life, that it chose humanity over destruction, that this small alien, trembling, exhausted, afraid, deserved protection, not fear. The soldiers hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their visors until the forest trembled once more with the distant, echoing calls of more Anacondrax. A chorus of predators converging on the crash site, their hunger drawn by the scent of spilled venom and unleashed power. And in that instant, humanity made its decision. The squad leader barked orders, not to detain the child, but to defend it, forming a shield wall around Arya as they began retreating toward the dropship, firing warning shots into the shifting shadows of the jungle as serpentine shapes slithered between the trees. And for the first time in perhaps thousands of years, a Kaerathun infant was embraced by human arms instead of hunted by alien empires. Arya held the child close as the soldiers fought their way through the encroaching jungle, vines snapping, roots lifting, predators lunging from the darkness, and each time the baby stirred with fear, she whispered that familiar promise, "I've got you. We survived together." And though the world around them burned, though the storm above cracked the sky open like a wounded scream, though the Anacondrax circled them like living nightmares of coil and venom, humanity pressed forward, refusing to abandon the smallest among them. Because this was humanity's strength, the trait that set them apart from every cold and calculating species in the galaxy. When something, no matter how alien, no matter how dangerous, looked at them with trust, they would tear apart heaven and earth to protect it. And as the dropship engines roared to life, and the soldiers hauled Arya and the infant aboard, leaving the collapsing jungle beneath them, the infant opened its dim silver eyes and clung weakly to her shirt, recognizing her scent, her heartbeat, her warmth, and in that fragile moment, a bond was forged that would one day ignite revolutions, topple empires, and rewrite the destiny of both their species. For in the end, this was more than a rescue. This was the birth of a legend, the beginning of a story history would later call "The Day a Human Saved the Last Carthoon," and the day the last Carthoon chose humanity back